It's time to call out the Sound of Freedom movie and its actual motivations. This is not about protecting children. This is about finding a group of guys to demonize and damage and harm. That's what this is about. And the reason why I'm getting into this particularly is I see young, naive YouTubers, in this case, Altiori, who don't understand what the motivation is. Now, this is her take on it. Oh, but before we go any further, I just want to prove my point real quick. If people cared about exploitation of children, they would have stopped the child beauty pageants ages ago. And they don't. Okay, so let's get in to see what she has to say about this.
To the rule, especially when you consider poachers. So for this man to then admit that the movie does speak about truths, but it's catering to people's emotions of a specific group to get them to what? What is the real issue here? To get the QAnon people to feel sorry for the children and to fight for this? I don't really see how we lose in this situation, because regardless of whether or not you hate a certain group, I don't even know what QAnon is, but if their tenets involve protecting children, what is the issue? If you were monopolizing or hijacking their emotions to bring them into a cause where the children will ultimately benefit from this, what is the real issue? I don't understand why people are fighting hard against this. And it's a decent movie with a decent message that
I disagree, young lady. I think you're very gullible. This is a horrible movie with a horrible message. Because it's not about protecting children. It's about demonizing men. There's this other group of guys. We've got to get them. Now, let me show you, for example. You've heard of Cuties, right? Here's the writer of Cuties and the director, where she exploited preteen girls in a sexual manner. Was she ever thrown behind bars? What's her name? DeCure? I don't know if I got her name right. Was she ever thrown behind bars for child molestation or sex trafficking or any of that? No. She was praised because she's a woman. And again, where are they? The mothers. Child beauty pageants are mothers parading their daughters in a sexual way. These costumes are the least of, they're just cute costumes, but I've seen them in very sexualized costumes before, right? Why don't they stop this? Where's QAnon against this? They're nowhere. You know why? Because their mothers are exploiting them. Women are allowed to do whatever they like with children. And they don't even have to traffic them in an official way. They don't have to, they can, well, actually, they do traffic them. They probably do travel across state borders to show off their little girls. And many of these mothers might be pedos themselves. No one questions women's sexuality, by the way. Why wasn't this Cuties director got the pedo smeared like all the men do, right? Because the pedophile smear is about demonizing men. It has nothing to do with children whatsoever, okay? Now, also, if people cared about trafficking, here is an article where you have men, grown men, they're stuck on boats. They've been enslaved, right? These Indonesian men and the surrounding waters, hundreds of trapped men represent one of the most desperate links to crisscrossing between companies and countries in seafood industry, right? So these impoverished men from impoverished countries are snatched up on boats and they can't get off them. They can't even escape to other countries because they're foreign men and other countries don't want them. So they can't even get off the boat and hightail it, right? The Burmese slaves sat on the floor and stared to the rusty bars of their locked cage, right? Loaded with cargoes of slave-caught seafood that clouds the supply of networks to major supermarkets, et cetera, et cetera. I'll include this in the description box. The point is, nobody cares about this. They made this one article. Where are these? Hey, where are your ulterior? Where are these QAnon superheroes for those guys, right? They're nowhere. They're nowhere. Now, this is very damning. This is collective learning. He talks about these Snowtown murders, which these guys, under the cover of fighting pedophiles, rounded up and tortured men. Now, listen to what he had to say.
General outline. This went on for years. People would be chained up in bathtubs and brutally tortured for hours and eventually killed. And there was a lot of domination, humiliation involved in how these people were treated.
Yeah, exactly. So these guys, they want to take the law in their own hands, but they didn't ship these guys over to the police, and they didn't just kill them, right? They tortured them, and there was a lot of humiliation and domination involved. So these are sick men using that as an excuse to attack other men, right?
And lead up to the death. But things get even more sinister than that as the years go by. Initially, it's a sort of crusade against pedophiles, take revenge against them, stop them from ever doing it ever again.
He's about to contradict himself. Obviously, what he just said is false. It's not a crusade against pedophiles. Listen.
And there's a kind of social justice framing to it, although the torture is still, pretty hard to condone.
It can't be condoned at all. Because if it can be condoned, that means the police, if they pick up a suspect, can torture and murder them. Of course it can't be condoned. If these guys were the heroes they claim to be, they'd simply be grabbing these guys and try to get them prosecuted. They'd be making a citizen's arrest.
But at least you can appreciate there was some reason for what they did. But as the years went on, the reasons for killing people became more obscure. It stopped being just about protecting kids from paedophiles, and it started being, well, he's gay, let's kill him, he's homosexual, and homosexuals are, according to these guys, abusers of children by default. So they...
Okay, then you just countered what you said earlier. It was never about protecting children. Because obviously it was an excuse. Because homophobia is a disgust at male sexuality. Because Iger, did they attack and kill any women? No, right. So this is about attacking men.
Associated paedophiles and homosexuals as one and the same, basically. So they would start killing homosexuals just because they were homosexual. And one of the victims was a homosexual who was actually mentally disabled, or whatever the politically correct term is that is used these days, learning disabilities, whatever.
So he was an easy target. They're attacking guys that they believe that society will allow them to, will condone.
Terms change all the time. But anyway, this guy was mentally disabled, but the fact that he was gay was enough for them to say, right, this guy needs to be tortured and murdered. So they did that. And the very last victim that they did, or at least the last victim that is known that they did, was actually the stepbrother of Jamie Vlasakis. And Jamie Vlasakis helped them to trap this guy and then allowed him to be tortured and murdered. But this guy wasn't a homosexual, he wasn't a pedophile, he was just what John Bonting called a yuppie,
Exactly. So Iger here is trying to make it out like it changed over time. Where I'm telling you now, there was no change. This is what it was always about. And I hope you're listening, Altieri, if I get your name right. How do you say? Artiori. It's about finding men to destroy. It's hate of other men. The guy was a yuppie. See? Because it was never about protecting children. And again, if society cared about protecting women, this woman would be behind bars. And this would be stopped. And it isn't. Right? So children are neither here nor there to society. I mean, even if you find someone like Brittany Zamora, who was sentenced for 20 years, and actually if you look in the comment section, it's either like one that where they turn it off and guys can't say what they want to say, or in this case, no one ever says about Zamora, I hope she gets done in jail, or she deserves to be rot in hell. No, I was skimming down the comments. No one talks like that, because people do not have the hatred of women. So this woman was simply tried in a court of law, found guilty with evidence, and put behind bars. Yet these QAnon monsters, what do they want to do? They want to destroy men, and they're using this as a can opener to get at any kind of man. But there's another thing I want to add. One last thing. They talk about elites. So it's not just an attack on men, but it's also resentment of their own low status. These high status men, right? I want to get at those rich guys because I'm not rich. That's the other motivation with them. Okay. Matter of fact, she's going to actually fall into their false framing.
All of a sudden, this movie is somehow controversial because what? It points out that people in high places are the very ones with the power to run these trafficking schemes, you know, like the Epstein people. Like, oh my God, this stuff happens in real life. God forbid someone shines a light to it in a movie.
Epstein, let me tell you something, the difference, a very important difference, Altiori. In this case, where these young men got foisted on the boat, they're kept there with brutality and threats and beatings. Okay. These Epstein simply he simply tempted teenage girls to hang around with high status men. They weren't clubbed over the head or dragged or drugged. They made their choices. Those teenage girls looked at boys their own age and had contempt for them and said, we don't want to deal with them. And they chose to hang around high status men. So there's no comparison. Epstein is meaningless next to the true blue injustices of the world, right? So I'm going to say that to you too, because it needs to be said, right? And frankly, it shows you that you tend to have the same kind of brutal instincts as these QAnon assholes. Okay? So we'll end it at like this.